Good morning, all. Thank you for joining the webinar today. We're going to give folks another moment to begin to log in, so we'll be starting soon. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 to 24 Better Buildings webinar series. Dedicated to bringing you the latest actionable insights from leading industry experts, this annual series is a chance to explore the topics, technologies, and trends that affect your organization, as well as efforts to accelerate decarbonization and energy efficiency adoption. All right, so today's webinar is called The Grass is Always Greener, Best Practices for Water Efficient Landscaping. Before we dive in, though, there are a few housekeeping points I would like to cover. Please note, today's webinar will be recorded and archived on the Better Building Solutions Center. We will follow up when today's recording and slides are made available, so you can go access those. Next, attendees are in listen-only mode, meaning your microphones are muted. If you experience any audio or visual issues throughout the webinar, please send a message in the Q&A box located in the bottom of your Zoom panel, and we have great support staff that can help you out there. And as far as introductions, my name is Prakash Rao. I will be your moderator today. I am at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, located in Berkeley, California. I am a research scientist and the head of the Building and Industrial Applications Department. I've been working with the Better Buildings team for several years now on water, and I'm extremely excited for this one because I know how important irrigation and how much water irrigation can constitute for many of your portfolio. So this is good. This is going to be a good one today. Next slide, please. All right, so our brief high-level agenda here. We're going to do some introductions. Then we have some polls just to get ourselves familiarized with who we are and get a little smattering of some of our experiences around water conservation. Then we have three amazing speakers who are really going to illuminate some of these irrigation topics and challenges and how they've overcome them. And then we're going to leave some time for some Q&A and then some final notes to get you ready for the next webinar. Okay, so I want to just start off with a really short Better Buildings, Better Plants Water Savings Network overview for those who may not be familiar or just want a few more details on it. Next slide, please. So what is it? Let's start there. It's a network of Better Buildings and Better Plants partners participating in peer exchange activities and that can gain recognition for their proven solutions around water conservation. So you work with DOE to track a water reduction goal across a portion of your all your plants and buildings, your portfolio, or it could be a subset. So you might want to focus on water-stressed regions or maybe regions that have excessive water costs, or regulations, or whatever it might be. That's up to you, but you track a goal and you share your progress across it. So why join? Well, just like in the Better Plants or Better Buildings programs, you receive great technical guidance from DOE and supporting organizations such as the EPA. Example, today we have the EPA on the webinar to deliver a great presentation. You're part of a network of peers, so peer exchange and kind of understand how others are tackling the same problems you face. You set a water goal for all or a portion of your portfolios. You could focus on water-stressed regions or water-expensive regions, whatever the case may be, which water goals are new to a lot of folks. So, this could be an opportunity to get started there and get recognized for your proven hard solutions, your hard work that you're doing to save water. So how do you join? As I mentioned, the recommended approach is to set a water reduction goal and track and report progress across a portion or all of your U.S. buildings and plants portfolio. But as we're saying, water goals are maybe not are somewhat newer to the sustainability sweet as sustainability sweet as energy. So maybe we don't all have water goals yet, but you could still participate in the water savings network. You could publish a water reduction solution on the Better Building Solutions Center. You could share best practices and lessons learned in a webinar such as this one, or another peer exchange format. Maybe it's the summit or something like that. Or you can document the ways water reduction impacts other priority areas such as energy reductions, like the Water Energy Nexus, resilience, productivity, equity, and workforce development. So if you don't have a water goal, don't sweat it. There's a bunch of ways you can still participate in this program. Next slide, please. So right now, the Water Savings Network has grown to be over 70 partners with over 10 goal achievers and $13 billion in gallons in cumulative water savings, which for those of you, including myself, who need to contextualize that, it's about 20,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools, which in and of itself might need some contextualization, because that's a lot of swimming pools, and 150 plus proven water saving solutions, so that anyone can benefit from reading about. And as you see our water goal achievers, you can see that this program of network spans all sectors. You have manufacturing, you have commercial buildings, you have housing. So it's really a great representation of water end users. Next slide, please. And here you get the full list of partners. As we mentioned, it's over 70 partners broken out into industrial and commercial establishments. So those are the participants right now in the Water Savings Network. Okay, so today we're going to be using a feature called Slido, or a website called Slido. So please, on your phone, or if you want to open a different window, go to www.slido.com. And in there, you'll see a little bar at the top, and with the hashtag already in there for you, pop in DOE. And that will take you to our webinar-specific Slido page, where we can we'll run some polls next, and you can also share questions through that to the speakers through that system. So let's start with some polls. One thing I did forget to mention, as you enter questions in Slido, maybe you see your colleague put a question in and you really like it, you can hit a thumbs up, and that will double up on the questions. So our first poll, we want to learn more about you. So let's start off with a few polls. Please join us over at Slido. I think many of you are over there. And let's start with these questions. So the first question is, what sector best describes your organization? And it looks like you guys are out to the races. Looks like contractor or consultant is on top and staying on top, but not by a lot. Okay, so it looks like we have a fairly good representation of folks. Maybe a little bit lower on some of the ones down below, but at least contractor, consultant, other, nonprofits, local government are all 10+% of y'all. So that's really great. We have a great group of folks. Okay, why don't we go to the next one? Okay, are you tracking your organization's water use? Yes, no, or you're not really sure? Give you guys a few seconds to answer that one. It looks like, yeah, it looks like a pretty even split. A little bit more on the yes side. This is not uncommon. So I think tracking water use is really challenging. Metering is tough in organizations. The billing cycles are weird. So wholly not surprising that 40% of folks are not tracking water use and 15% are unsure. That kind of lines up with a lot of experiences. Water is kind of new, so that's to track. So that's why we have webinars like this one today to help folks get on their water management journey. Next slide, please, or poll, please. What are some successes when implementing water conservation measures? So I think this one's a word cloud. So we'll give some folks. I like Billy Hinton saying NA. And so a couple of people saying NA. Saving money's coming up. You've been able to reduce. That's great. And maybe usage and reduction we can lump into one, and money. So it looks like a lot of you guys are doing it for the cost savings aspect of it. That's great. It's great to be able to see that water savings is paying off as well, that you guys are seeing contributions to the bottom line there. Give a few more seconds. Just it looks like answers are flying in. Yeah, 27 is cost or money, so that's great. And the rest are just to save water. So yeah, that's wonderful. Oh, great. Eric Wilson saying GHG and state goals. So that's great. That's an example of the water energy carbon nexus there. Okay, well, that's really useful, I think. I think we have one more poll question. What are some challenges experienced when implementing water conservation measures? So we've heard about the successes. You guys have saved money. You guys have saved water. We'd love to hear about some of the challenges that you all share. On the flip side of that, cost of implementation is the first one that pops up. Yeah, all right. So cost is and implementation kind of, I think, are kind of some of the bigger ones. So user and education is rising here, and I wonder if that's sort of just getting people to understand the benefits of water conservation measures and kind of convincing folks that this is something your organization should be doing. But cost is rising to the top, that these are expensive. So that's interesting. Cost is on both the benefits and the challenges. So I guess folks are seeing cost savings, but sometimes it's not at perhaps financially attractive implementation costs. Let me give a few more minutes to round this one out. Disruptive installations, interesting. But yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna declare cost the winner on that one and on both. All right. So as a reminder, you can use Slido throughout this webinar to ask questions. I'll use those questions that you all generate to run our Q&A at the end. But let's get into it. So today's presenters, we have three wonderful presenters. We have Tara O'Hare from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Michael Gulich from MGM Resorts, and John Walker from the University of Utah today. By way of introductions, Tara O'Hare currently serves as the implementation and commercial outreach lead for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's WaterSense program in Washington, D.C. Tara has worked on WaterSense for the past 14 years and is responsible for program operations, partner support, and outreach to commercial and institutional facilities. So we're going to be excited to hear from Tara. We think probably all benefited from the WaterSense program, so that's great. Next, speaker two will be Michael Gulich, who is the Vice President of Environmental Sustainability and Social Governance Reporting at MGM Resorts International. He leads the development and execution of strategies to reduce the environmental impacts of MGM Resort buildings, operations, and events globally. So we're excited to have Michael. For those of you who've been to the MGM Resorts, you know they use a lot of water, so that's going to be great to see. And finally, John Walker will round us out. And John Walker is the ground supervisor at the University of Utah and has been in that role for the last 3 years. He manages a team of 45 employees, maintaining the campus, hospital, and dorms landscape and irrigation at the University of Utah, located in Salt Lake City. So, and after John, we'll have some Q&A. But enough of me. So I'm going to go off camera, and I'm going to ask our first speaker, Tara O'Hare, to go ahead and kick us off today. Thank you, Tara.
All right. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. You can go to the next slide. So first, I wanted to give you all some context of why you should care about water. We talked a little bit about water in general, but why should you care about outdoor water? One of the big things is that outdoor water is a primary driver of peak use within the water system. So water providers must size their systems to meet this peak demand capacity, which is not always used. So this can be one of the first things to be restricted during droughts or other shortages as well. And one thing to keep in mind is because they do use that peak water demand to size their systems, it's also one of the things that they go after for policing water use. So one of the big things is that water use is very visible outdoors, and it's really easy to police. So it's easier to enforce outdoor watering restrictions than it is to regulate the interior of a building. So your water provider is paying attention. It can also be more expensive because higher water use often results in higher water rate tiers, and you actually pay for water twice. So if you're using a lot of water outdoors, you may not be needing all of that water, so it could be a reason to cut back. So you pay for water twice. You pay for water when it comes into your facility and also when it goes out of your facility in the sewer rate. So if you can find areas to save water outdoors, it makes a big difference in your bottom line. And then also you really want to protect your investments in your landscape. So that really includes trying to reduce any plant losses that may happen with improper irrigation or not enough irrigation. Next slide. So just to give you an overview, we put together a few profiles of different building types, and these are just kind of generalities, but as you can see in green here, water use or outdoor water use is about 5 to 30% of your water use within a facility. Obviously, it varies depending on the size of the landscape and the age of some of the equipment. But one of the ways to really get a handle on how water is being used in your facility is to do a water assessment. So you can do a full one for the entire indoors and outdoors of your building, or you can just do your outdoor water use as well. There are pretty good resources on how to do that. Next slide. So WaterSense is a program that we created to kind of help meet this demand for this information and for ways to actually reduce your water use. So for those of you who aren't familiar, WaterSense is a voluntary program launched by EPA in 2006. And we really work to find simple ways to help businesses and consumers identify water efficient products, programs, practices, and homes. The WaterSense label is the one that's on the right side of your screen, and that's found on products that are independently certified for water efficiency and performance. Back in the early 90s, when low flow products hit the market, they didn't always work very well. So each one of the specifications that WaterSense does includes a performance requirement to make sure that it works just as well as its standard counterparts. Next slide. So WaterSense labels products for both the indoor suite of restrooms as well as outdoor products, which I'm going to focus on today. We have spray sprinkler bodies, which are the housing of the sprinkler head and manages the pressure within the system. And then we have two types of irrigation controllers. We have weather-based irrigation controllers that use data from a weather station to determine if watering is needed, or soil moisture-based sensors, which is a little sensor that literally sits in the soil and basically measures how much moisture is there to determine if watering is needed. And there are more than 38,000 product models that have earned the label to date in all different price ranges and styles and types. So when you're looking for a water efficient product, you can look for the WaterSense label. Next slide. So as I mentioned, outdoor water use is 5 to 30% of a building's water use. And really the name of the game here is to minimize the amount of water needed to supplement rainwater to meet a plant's watering needs. So that's basically what we're talking about today. So one thing to keep in mind, kind of overarching, is that if you have irrigation or landscape service agreements, they should include water goals and requirements to follow local watering restrictions. If you are using internal staff to do this work, there are a lot of courses and seminars that you can go to learn more about water savings and how to do this properly. So we encourage you to check that out. if you are doing it in-house. Next slide. So there's a few factors that we found that really contribute to high water usage, especially outdoors. So these can be really great places to look for savings. First of all, in general, the age of the equipment and the facility can be a good indicator, because a lot of products have become more efficient over time. So if you have an older product, it may not be as efficient as the one you have today. So you may want to consider replacing it. So generally, the size of your landscape is going to be one of the biggest factors. If you have things like athletic fields, outdoor pools and spas, or a vehicle washing station at your facility, those are going to be really big users of water. So they could be a good place to look. The other thing to keep in mind is your climate, your average rainfall, and your evapotranspiration needs, which is basically the watering needs of the plants, are going to be affected by your climate. So there's a lot of areas of the country that are under drought restrictions right now, and it really honestly changes over the years. It's in different places at different times. So just because you're not in drought right now, you may be in drought in the future. So it's important to pay attention. As I mentioned, the size of the landscape and irrigated areas are going to be the big drivers of water usage, and also plant selection. If you're using native or low water using plants, they actually will save you quite a bit of money in the long run, because they don't need as much irrigation. And then if you have microclimates on site, this is basically where you have a little zone where there may be a different temperature because of shading, for example, or if you have just different types of plants situated in different parts of the landscape, that can actually help to drive your water use as well. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the name of the game here is really trying to provide as much irrigation as needed to meet the plant's watering needs. So this can really be driven by minimizing the need for irrigation as much as possible by selecting plants that have low water needs. Or you can take a look at your water budget and figure out how much water is needed in different parts of the year. So this graph right here is basically an example of the rainfall and evapotranspiration needs of the plants for Tampa, Florida. And as you can see from the chart, the time period of the water deficit can be different throughout the year. In this case, the highest month of deficit is April, which is in that dark blue line, as you can kind of see. That's where you have to put a lot of irrigation into the system to make up for the needs that are happening on the ground. So this is basically where you're going to need the largest amount of supplemental irrigation. And this is, something that varies widely depending on your climate. So WaterSense created a water budget finder for figuring out your peak watering month by your actual zip code. So I encourage you to check that out to find out what your peak water month is, and that can help you as well determine how much extra watering is needed. So for example, in Washington, D.C., the peak water use is usually July, and it basically is about a 3-inch deficit of water that's needed through irrigation. So it changes all over the country. So I encourage you to check out yours today. Next slide. So one of the things to keep in mind is that a well-designed, healthy, water-efficient landscape can really help to reduce the amount of irrigation that's needed. So the foundation of your landscape is really your soil. So healthy soils can help develop deep plant root systems and allow water to properly infiltrate in the system. So it's really important to maintain good topsoil that captures the rain as it falls and releases water back to the plants over time. So you also want to make sure that you have appropriate irrigation for any gradings or slopes that you have within your system. If possible, you want to avoid steep slopes whenever you can. A good tip is that if it's too steep to climb, it's too steep for irrigation. So in that case, you might want to use some sort of ornamental plants or something that really requires less water use to put on that slope. And then you can actually use different techniques of irrigation to water those appropriately if you do have them, which I'll go over in a few minutes. Another thing is to consider adding mulch to your plant beds because it keeps the soils cool and minimizes the evaporation that's happening in the system. So that kind of holds the water near the actual root of the plants, which can really help to maintain your system over time. Next, you want to use drought tolerant and native plants or climate appropriate plants that are appropriate for your area and your climate. So there's a lot of different varieties. It's not all cactuses. I promise there's a lot of options that look much more attractive than xeriscaping. So I encourage you to take a look at what's appropriate for your region and figure out what makes sense for you. And then if you can, minimize your turf area and limit it to places where it's needed for a function, rather than just having it in like strips in the parking lot, for example. Those don't really provide any function and just are areas that you have to maintain. And finally, your landscape should really try to group plants according to their water needs so that you can target irrigation to those zones that require a specific amount of water. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the right plant in the right place is going to be really important for your system. So it's important to select plants that are appropriate for the soil type and you're obviously to the exposure for sun and wind as well. And whenever possible, use drought tolerant native plants and try to find ways that you can incorporate trees into your landscape as well, because trees provide shade, which can reduce the amount of irrigation that's needed because it reduces the evaporation. Next, you want to avoid strip grass, which is what I was mentioning before. So in the top picture, that could be grass if you really wanted it to be, but it's not providing a function for your facility. So that may be an example of a place where you can use drought tolerant plants instead of grass. And that will actually help you maintain it a little bit easier as well. And then where you can, it's helpful to install rain gardens because they capture the rainwater as it falls and then can kind of hold it in the soil so that you can use and reduce the amount of irrigation that you have to do. So there are different plant lists for each state. So it really kind of depends on what your state climate is like. So I encourage you to take a look. We have a list of plant lists. So they can be good ways to figure out what plants to use. Next slide. So as we saw in the earlier chart, outdoor spaces can be 5 to 30% of a building's water use. And unfortunately, experts estimate that up to 50% of the water used for irrigation is actually lost due to wind, evaporation, or overwatering. And some contributors to these losses can be poor irrigation system design, improper installation and management, lack of maintenance, or improper scheduling. So we're going to go over a couple of those now. Next slide. Oh, one more. Sorry. There we go. So WaterSense, as I mentioned, labels both weather-based and soil moisture-based irrigation controllers. And these basically operate in different ways to adjust your irrigation schedule based on the local weather or on-site conditions. That way, the controller that you choose can really be whichever properly fits the needs of your landscape. So as I mentioned, weather-based controllers use a combination of weather station data and evapotranspiration data from your site to determine if the watering cycle is actually needed. And in the same way, soil moisture sensors sit in the soil and determine if there's enough moisture there to skip a cycle of irrigation. So these can be really great ways to control the amount of water in your system, and it's important to kind of maintain these over time as well. WaterSense has a whole bunch of brochures and resources and guides on how to actually do this and use these effectively. Next slide. So there's a few capabilities of irrigation controllers to keep in mind because really the driver of your irrigation is going to be the irrigation schedule. So it's really important to update irrigation schedules monthly to account for changes in weather conditions. And so your landscape, for example, will need less water in the spring or fall months rather than in the high peak of summer. So it's important to change it with the seasons. So it's a good one, for example, right now that we've hit fall, it's really important to adjust your schedule to use less water within your irrigation system. So if you don't have a controller that adjusts the schedule for you, you want to make sure that you do it yourself. Next, you can consider if there are steep slopes or clay soil within your system, it could be useful to do what's called cycle and soak, which is where you do a water less frequently to actually reduce the runoff. So this, is basically because the water isn't infiltrating the soil and it's kind of running off on the surface, and you kind of want to avoid that. So if you can use less frequent watering cycles, that helps. And this also helps to encourage deep root growth, because it's really important to do it to make the plants hardier and last and more resilient. So it's really good to irrigate in larger volumes but less frequently. Next, you want to look at the zones. So if you've been able to group plants together by their watering needs, then you can irrigate that zone specifically because of what it needs. So it's important to take a look at those different zones and make sure that they're programmed appropriately as well. And then you want to look for any pooling or puddling, which could indicate a system leak or inefficiency. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the spray sprinkler body is really the external shell that houses the sprinkler head or the nozzle and connects to the irrigation system piping, and it controls the pressure within the system. So some sprinkler bodies have built-in pressure regulating features that help compensate for high inlet pressure. So if the pressure within your system is too high, it can lead to misting or overspray, and you really want to avoid that because it's just wasting water, basically. So using the pressure regulating bodies that basically can help you make sure that the system pressure is appropriate for your system and can make a consistent flow as well as consistent droplet sizes. So that way you're applying water to the landscape in a more efficient manner. Next slide. So the last point that I'll make today is that it's important to maintain your system. You can't just set it and forget it. So one of the things you want to do is really check your system for broken or clogged sprinkler heads. The pictures here are some examples of some really big problems. The one on the right is what we call a geyser, and that's basically where the sprinkler head has been ripped off completely and it's just like shooting out water. So these are examples of things you obviously want to avoid. But the other things to consider are things like moving your sprinkler components to avoid watering pavement. Pavement and hardscape doesn't grow, so it doesn't need water. You also want to look for pooling or puddling or depressions in the soil, because sometimes if there's a depression in the soil, that can indicate an underground leak, which can be one of the only ways to find a leak in the system sometimes. You also may want to consider installing a submeter on the system to detect leaks and other issues. And you want to audit your system on a regular basis, at least once every 3 years. So WaterSense actually labels irrigation professional training programs. So we basically decide if the test is covering the information that's required. And then once someone passes the test, they can make it onto our list of irrigation professionals. So if you're not sure what to do and you want to outsource it, you can take a look at our irrigation professional list and find someone in your area to help you. Next slide. So this is just an overview of the savings potential that you can get from these different technology types. And so the irrigation controllers can save you about 15%. Spray sprinkler bodies can save you about 20% and more if you have really high incoming water pressure. And then if you have efficient nozzles, they can save about 30%. WaterSense is currently working on a label for sprinkler nozzles, so that's something to look for in the future. And then if you have micro irrigation, that's actually the most efficient, which can be 20 to 50% savings. Next slide. So WaterSense has a bunch of resources that are available to help you. We have a bunch on our website, which I'll go through really quickly. Next slide. We have a group of best practices for commercial buildings, and the ones on irrigation and landscaping are being updated. They're probably going to be posted this month. So I encourage you to take a look at those because it goes into much more depth about these types of irrigation systems and the different things to look for when you're actually, putting these systems in place. Next slide. As I mentioned, we have plant lists that can help you decide what to put in your landscape, as well as some brochures, basically. And next slide. And we have a bunch of guides. We have one on micro irrigation. If you want to learn more about that, we have a whole bunch of information on that, as well as some mini reports for the technologies that we have. And I didn't cover pools today, but we do have a pool water efficiency guide. So check that out if you have pools in your landscape. Next slide. So I'd encourage you to check out, we had a outdoor spaces webinar earlier this year. So if you're interested in hearing more and another case study after today's webinar, you can check that out with the link that's here. Next slide. That's it. You can contact us if you have any questions or type them into Slido.
That was great. Thank you so much, Tara. That was a wealth of information. Next, we have Michael Golich, again from MGM Resorts. Michael, stage is yours.
Great. Thanks, Prakash. And thank you to Better Buildings and DOE for hosting today. MGM Resorts is an S&P 500 global entertainment company with 31 resorts globally, totaling over 92 million square feet. We have 75,000 employees. Almost 90% of our portfolio meets the facilities environmental standards such as LEED, Green Key, or Green Globes. We're headquartered in Las Vegas. I'm also located in Las Vegas, and I've been with MGM just over a year. Next slide, please. When we think about water, we start with the macro. And really, when you're thinking about water, you need to be thinking at the basin level or the watershed level. As an architect, personally, we often as designers think about the facility scale or the site scale, but we really need to start at a much larger scale. Our water system in Las Vegas and Southern Nevada is somewhat unusual in the sense that that the Southern Nevada Water Authority for decades has been working on conservation and issues of water scarcity. And so we have almost a closed loop system for any water that goes down a drain. Any water that goes down a drain is treated and returned to Lake Mead and is tracked with return flow credits. So we make a distinction that's I think important between consumptive water use and non-consumptive water use. Non-consumptive is what goes down a drain and is returned to Lake Mead ultimately. Consumptive use is water that's effectively leaving the system. And of course, irrigation falls in this consumptive use category. Next slide, please. So in terms of our water use, about 90% of our water comes from municipal sources, and the balance is from wells that we own. And then again, to that distinction between consumptive and non-consumptive, about 3/4 of our water use is non-consumptive. And you can see some of the stats here. That's water that's going down the drain, being treated and returned to Lake Mead. The other roughly 1/4 is our consumptive use, and our biggest kind of sub-use there is our cooling towers, and then the other two big uses are irrigation and evaporation from our pools and water features. We have both a 2025 and 2030 goal for water use reduction. It is a water use intensity goal. We set a 30% reduction from a 2007 baseline for 2025 and actually achieved that early. And so we reset that to be a 33% reduction out to 2025. And we're right on the verge of achieving that early. Next slide, please. In terms of our approach to managing water, We start in design and development, and then consider water use in all of our ongoing operations. And of course, this is things like you would expect with irrigation, but also we are the largest operator of non-chain restaurants in the world. So places like our kitchens are heavy water users. And then we are, in terms of tactics, focused on data collection and monitoring. And then again, that distinction between non-consumptive water use reduction and consumptive water use reduction. Next slide, please. About a year and a half ago, our executive team posed the question to my team, who we want to be as a company around water and water stewardship. And that led my team to the development of a water white paper, which was really taking a research-driven approach to a sustainability issue. It's almost taking an integrated planning approach to the issue. And by taking this approach, we effectively brought along our C-suite and our board on this our water conservation journey, establishing a foundational understanding of the issues, and then moving to strategies and solutions. And this framework that you see on the screen was really an aha moment for us. I'll talk about the CEO water mandate and how this maps to that in a couple of slides. But really thinking about these 5 pillars of measurement, efficiency, quality, citizenship, and culture. And this water white paper and this foundational understanding has really allowed us to institute some quick wins, if you will, in terms of water stewardship. Next slide, please. So one of those quick wins was we were able to develop a global water policy. You can see here on the left some of the key actions that are encouraged under our global water policy, and this is available on our website, and I've got a link for this at the end. Importantly, when you think about a company like MGM, we have a very long tail in terms of our supply chain, and so this also is coming in really handy in terms of engagement with our supply chain. Next slide, please. Our CEO also endorsed the CEO water mandate earlier this year. We were the first gaming company to do so and the first Las Vegas-based company to do so. The CEO water mandate is a program of the UN Global Compact. It's administered and managed by the Pacific Institute. And the intention of the CEO water mandate is to catalyze corporate leadership around water stewardship and to accelerate action toward achieving SDG 6, which is clean water and sanitation. And we have some great engagement and collaboration with other companies who've endorsed the CEO water mandate. And I was able to lead a delegation to the UN Water Conference earlier this year and had a lot of great engagement with other endorsers. Next slide, please. So moving kind of from that macro context of how we think about water to specifically landscape irrigation, we've been really focused, especially with the Las Vegas portfolio, on evaluating very intentionally our landscape portfolio through the lens of water conservation, and focused on removing plants and materials that are maybe not appropriate for the climate zone and use a lot of water, and replacing them with water smart landscapes and native plantings, and then trying to be intentional and clever, if you will, with introducing sculptures and different design concepts. Through these efforts, we've removed over 200,000 square feet of real grass and water intensive landscapes and replaced them with water smart landscapes. This is allowing us to save almost 10 million gallons a year. And importantly, that's all from our consumptive water use. Next slide, please. We have been piloting the Rainbird IQ4 system. And importantly, it includes active weather data and evapotranspiration monitoring adjustment, and has multi-user access from mobile devices, which is really important in in a portfolio as large as ours. Next slide. Here you can see on the left an example. This is the park at MGM, at Park MGM of a desert-friendly landscape. And then we are doing a fair amount of artificial turf installation. Next slide, please. This is an example of artificial turf installation. It was a partnership with Sinlawn at Bellagio, where we installed over 15,000 square feet of turf, of artificial turf. Next slide. These are some before and after shots at Aria, which is another one of our ultra luxury resorts just up the strip from the Bellagio. This is before, well, this is an in progress issue as we're removing a water intensive landscape. And then the next slide shows the end result. And I think Tara said earlier, it's not all cactuses. I think this is a good example of that we can have lush landscapes that are water smart. And then next slide, please. In terms of where we're headed, we do have some final water intensive landscape conversions that are in process. We are moving on to looking at our water features and our well water usage for additional water savings opportunities. In 2024, we'll be completing the implementation of the Rainboard IQ4 system throughout the rest of our Las Vegas portfolio. And then finally, engaging our designers to assess work at our ultra luxury properties. I included this image, although I cheated a little bit. This is actually an interior shot in an atrium, but to make the point that, and myself being an architect and leading the sustainability team, I get both sides of the equation, the water conservation side and the aesthetic intent side. I think one of our biggest challenges may be around aesthetics and the expectation in terms of certain styles, and so we're working to balance that, and I think my best advice is to do that with intentionality and to take an integrated design approach, bring in all the stakeholders early, and we are also beginning to put out signage, which can be very helpful to communicate the why to our guests and our stakeholders. Next slide. I've got some resources that I encourage you to check out, especially the global water policy and our water white paper. With that, I'll turn it over to John. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for that great presentation. Just a quick reminder, folks, you can pop questions into Slido. And if we don't have time today, we might send the questions over to our speakers and have them respond offline. But with that, John, from the University of Utah, please take us away. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so a lot has been covered between Tara and Michael. I think it's been a great presentation so far. Really happy to be part of this. They kind of covered a lot of the background, so I'm really just going to focus on successes, challenges, opportunities that we've had. The University of Utah is a big campus. 1,500 acres. We have a hospital complex, we have dorms, we have all of our buildings, sports fields, and all of our open landscapes on campus. Takes a lot to manage, uses a lot of water if we're not very careful. Next slide, please. So May 2022, the Utah House passed a bill. Always fun to start a presentation with a wall of text. Basically, the big takeaway here is by 2023, our goal was a 5% water reduction based on the fiscal year 2020 water use. We surpassed that. The next goal, 25% by fiscal year 2026. And this is for all state agencies, outdoor water use. And then it goes on to list some of the best management practices, I guess you could put it, leak detection, manually shutting off irrigation during rainstorms, evaluating opportunities to upgrade irrigation technology. A lot of this stuff, it's actually kind of nice because I've been at the university for 10 years. I've been the ground supervisor for 3. But even before my time here, the university has already been working on water conservation and really, really thoughtful about how they've been going about that and how we've been conserving water. So a lot of this, when this House bill came out, a lot of people were panicking about it. We were kind of already doing it, so it made it pretty easy. But it has been an interesting transition to see how things have changed and how people's perceptions of water saving have changed in the last couple of years with this drought that we've been in. Next slide, please. So what we're doing at the University of Utah right now, in 2018, I was looking at opportunities that we had to change out our irrigation controllers. Luckily, we have a sustainability department within facilities, and they have a revolving sustainability fund. If we could show water savings with whatever we wanted to install, they would basically offset the cost of that. We could get a grant for it. The weather track irrigation controllers, we estimated that it would be about a 5-year payback on that. Got the $500,000 loan, I guess, from facilities. And with that sustainability fund, we actually paid it back in about 2 years, ahead of schedule of what we thought we were going to do. Everyone was happy all around. We saved water. We paid the money back. And it was a really great use of those funds for us. We have saved about 21% since 2020. So we're on the way to our goal for 2026 fiscal. And I can't say that that's all been weather track. There's been a lot of work with flow sensors and my irrigation staff going out and making sure that we're repairing leaks and not letting things run unnecessarily. But weather track has been a big part of that. We kind of started out with, like low-hanging fruit. What's the easy fixes? Irrigation controllers are always going to be the easy fixes, and you're going to see a fairly immediate return on investment if you manage them properly. We've also been updating older irrigation systems, and that's kind of an ongoing thing. Like Tara talked about, pressure regulating sprinklers, match precipitation rate nozzles. Those have all increased efficiency in our irrigation systems and really shown a good return on that with the water savings that we've had also. And again, kind of going back to the weather track, we also installed flow sensors with those so that we're able to monitor and kind of get that data and say, yes, we're changing these out, and we can see that return. We can see how much water we've saved over that. So flow sensors, water audits, identifying high water use areas, and then we kind of keep that in our back pocket for as future funding becomes available, then we can address those areas and continue to save water on that. Next slide, please. So some of the opportunities that we have on campus, I feel kind of fortunate because we do have multiple funding sources between state capital funds, my budget, the facilities, sustainability funds, student funds. There's a lot of ways that we can fund some of these projects. So we're looking at what's going to be the most effective, how can we save the most water, and where is it the most useful. Again, going back to what Tara said, there are lots of areas on campus that we have grass that people just don't use. The only time they get walked on is when my staff goes and mows it, and that's about it. So we're looking at those areas that we can convert to low water, water-wise landscape that fits with the building, fits with the aesthetic, and is still a usable, nice space for students. We've identified quite a few of those, and we're continually working on converting those. Next slide, please. The other thing we're working on, again, is redesigning our irrigation systems and increasing efficiency. We do have areas that we do need to have turf, tailgate areas, spots where students gather around the union, around the administration buildings. We need lawn areas on campus that are usable, and hopefully we can limit the amount of water on them and be a little more efficient with those. Water audits, again, flow sensors, knowing where we're using water and why. It's been a big advantage for us. And then we can take those areas, and if we need to keep turf there, we can redesign the irrigation system. It does cost a little bit more money. The return on investment is not as good as the irrigation controllers, but it definitely increases the efficiency of the water and increases the health of the turf. Next slide, please. Some of the other things we work on are not only making changes to landscape, but also making changes to our management practices. These are kind of the easy ones because it doesn't really cost anything. Areas that we want to have turf, we mow the grass a little bit higher. We mulch the grass instead of bagging it, so it returns the clippings back into the turf, gets it a little more fertilizer just with the natural grass clippings. Using mulch around trees and planter beds like Tara talked about. A lot of best management practices that you wouldn't think save water, but they really do create a healthier turf, healthier shrub bed. And then by that, having healthier plants, then they don't need as many inputs, don't need as much water. Okay, next slide on that. And again, kind of bragging a little bit about campus. Having resources on campus are huge for us. There's a initiative that has come out a couple of years ago that's a campus as a living lab, and that's reaching out to all the departments on campus for research opportunities and things that they want to do. We recently had a project that converted about 2 acres of turf. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, it was all just kind of useless turf. No one really was out there. A couple guys playing Frisbee, that was about it. Converted that to a water retention garden. There is still irrigation in there, but the majority of the water that goes through that is coming off of buildings and hardscapes around that area and funneled into that. It's been a great water savings for that, and the nice little infiltration garden in there. Since it was a student project, they were able to go through and do signage and use it as a teaching area as well. It's been a huge opportunity for us. Okay, next slide there. Some of the issues that we've had with reduced irrigation. Obviously, brown grass is not the aesthetic that a lot of people come to campus expecting. So we do have to be careful with where we're cutting back water and how we're doing that. We also have seen some areas where we've cut back water and the plants do suffer. We get increased weed pressure, and it does lead to more chemical use and a little bit more maintenance if we're not managing it properly. Next slide. This is kind of my pride of campus. We all are also a state arboretum. So we have 8,000 trees on campus. All of them are numbered. All of them are assessed. Beautiful state champion trees for size and shape, but we have to be very careful with our water use that we're not doing more damage to the trees as we're trying to cut back and save water. So we've been intentional about how and where we're watering. Again, I'm going to keep going back to Tara's talk. Zoning irrigation so that we can water turf separately from the trees, so we're not overwatering the turf while we're trying to water the trees appropriately. We're not underwatering the trees while we're trying to save water on turf. So a lot of thinking about things and being intentional with when and where we're using water. Next slide. So the results that we've seen, we have had places where we've cut back water too quickly, and those have suffered, but it's also kind of an opportunity for us to say, well, maybe we're not using water appropriately there, and it doesn't need to be that landscape. What can we change? How can we make it better? And where we have had successes, where we've reduced water, the plants stay healthy. They grow a little bit less. They're still healthy, requires less fertilizer, lower maintenance. And knowing that every input has a purpose and all of our decisions are based on the weather data that we have and the real-time data that we have has been incredibly helpful for us. And next slide. wraps up mine. Just a couple of resources for links for our landscape maintenance department, our state arboretum tree tour. If you're ever in Utah and you want to walk across campus, great tree tour. And Campus is a Living Lab, just to see the initiative that we've done. Well, not we really, but the departments have done on campus to make some changes and use campus as a research tool. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, John, for a great presentation. Thank you, Tara and Michael as well for really informative and great presentations. Okay, so if you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to download our additional resources handout that it will be shared in the chat Zoom box. And in the interest of time, we're about at the top of the hour. We're going to take Q&A offline. So we have a number of questions that you all have asked our panelists. What we'll do is we will take a subset of those, send them out to our panelists, and in the time that they have, ask them to type out the responses, and we'll post responses along with the link to the webinar on the BBSC. So we'll look out for that. So I think the next slide, as we're going to move away from Q&A. So thank you everyone for your questions. As you know, this part of the webinar is part of the 2023-24 Better Buildings webinar series. We will have a great lineup of presentations through March. Visit the Better Building Solutions Center to learn more and register. So you see you have a lot of opportunities to learn more multiple times a month. Our next webinar is going to be on Halloween, Tuesday, October 31st. It'll be the power of partnership and emissions reduction planning with local governments. So join this webinar to discover key strategies for successful collaboration with and across local governments to plan, implement, and measure progress on efforts to reduce emissions and create more sustainable communities. Next slide, please. And of course, please mark your calendars for my personal favorite event of the year, the Better Buildings, Better Plants Summit, April 2nd to the 4th in Washington, D.C. The event will feature engaging and interactive sessions, as well as opportunities for attendees to network with industry peers and national experts. Registration details will be forthcoming, so look out for that. Next slide. And one of the coolest things from the Better Buildings program, new things, the Roadshow. Check out season 1 of the Better Climate Challenge Roadshow. Our energy experts hit the road to see how our partners in the Nashville area are reducing their emissions. Watch as they visit Nissan, Whirlpool, and Chemours to see decarbonization in action. Are our partners on their way to meeting their goal of reducing emissions by 50% in 10 years? Will our hosts survive trying Nashville hot chicken? Tune in to season 1 on the Better Building Solutions Center and find out. Definitely check that out. It's a lot of fun. And with that, I'd like to close our presentation today. I want to thank our panelists, Tara O'Hare from the EPA, Michael Gullett from MGM Resorts, and John Walker for University of Utah. It was a wealth of information. I know I took away a lot. We will be following up with Q&A questions offline. I encourage you to follow the Better Buildings Initiative on LinkedIn and Twitter. You see the handles on the left. And you'll receive an email when today's recording slides and transcript and answers to the Q&A are available on the Better Building Solutions Center. With that, I want to close out and thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.